Hi, readers, it's Lori. Welcome back to my channel, Books, Ink, and Paper. Let's talk about what I read in the month of January. I did some stats this month because I have the book journal and because I have Storygraph. I have some stats for you. I'm so excited. So in January, I read 5 books and I have compiled some stats as a result of being on Storygraph now, and as a result of my book journal too. I had decided that I wanted to start tracking some things. So, in the month of January, I read 5 books. It was pretty good. It's about average for me. It's usually what I do. 3 of those books I would consider to be thrillers. One of them I am putting down as a cozy slash detective mystery. That's one of my genres that I've created in my book journal. And one of them I'm labeling as contemporary, although it had a little bit of magical realism in it. One of them was published in 2023, one in 2022. 2 of them were published in 2021, and one of them was published in 2019. So I didn't go too far back on the back list. 3 of them were physical copies that I read. 2 of them were audiobooks, and both of them I think I borrowed. I gave one a 5-star rating, two a 4-star rating, and two a 3-star rating. They were all in the adult demographic of readers. And Storygraph has indicated that if you were to give my audiobooks a page count number, I read 1,699 pages. And what I'm most proud of, and is one of my goals this year, is that I've read every single day so far of the year, but every single day in January. They were all fiction. And my ratio was digital was about 60% and print was 40%. So my average rating was 3.8 stars for the month. And my peak reading time was between the 9th and the 14th of January. I completed one reading sprint in the month of January, which is fine, but I would like to hopefully get to more of them than just one in a month. I'm actually also proud of the fact that 2 of these books were Book of the Month club books, and I completed those, which I'm trying to get my Book of the Month TBR down as well, so that I can maybe by the end of the year say, I'm reading them as soon as I get them. So let's talk about what I read. One of my goals, too, that I don't think I wrote down anywhere, but in my head, goals is that I want to read my Book of the Month books off the TBR down to just a couple, maybe, or one a month. Like I could get one and read one, get one and read one. That might be nice. I've only usually purchased one, two at the most now and again, but I don't want them to pile up and me not read them. So that is also something that's on my mind, and I need to do a bit better of a job. But in January, I did do pretty well because I finished Razorblade Tears. This was the first book that I read by S.A. Cosby. I've had this since 2021. It was a Book of the Year finalist that year. So that was also, it gave it some weight for me to want to get it. I think I didn't get it until it was a Book of the Month finalist, actually. I have never read anything by S.A. Cosby before, so this was my first new author to me. I did enjoy this. I really, really did. It is, though, very dark and very difficult to read, I think. The characters in this book they're rough. Like they're not unlikable completely, but they're not completely likable either. Ike and Buddy Lee each find themselves with a son who has been killed, and their sons were married. And Ike and Buddy Lee were not particularly receptive to the idea that their sons were gay and getting married. Not only had they gotten married, but they had a child. The child is then taken into the care of Ike and his wife. Both Ike and Buddy Lee have been to prison before. Buddy Lee is white, Ike is black. And Buddy Lee is determined to try to find out what happened and who killed their sons. And Ike is at first a little reluctant. He's come out of prison. He's made a name for himself as a business owner. He stayed on the pathway of, zero crime for a long time. He's proud of that. And yet he's grieving. The guilt that they both feel is really palpable in this book because of the way that they reacted and responded to their son's sexuality. So this is a story about them trying to discover who killed their son. And in the meantime, they confront their own internal prejudices and hate and experiences. So I think this was a well plotted book. I enjoyed the writing. There were times where I felt like there were some cliches or some things that, I didn't really need to be thrown in there. And it was really hard to read, like in the sense of the violence, the just the things that happened. It was a bit hard for me. I do have his other book called All the Sinners Bleed on Kindle, and I would like to get to that sometime this year. But I really enjoyed this. I recommend it, and I gave it 4 stars. Then I listened to Falling by TJ Newman, which is an audio that I purchased with my Libro.fm account. And this is the second TJ Newman that I have read. I read Drowning last year and really enjoyed it. Actually, I would say I enjoyed Drowning more than I enjoyed Falling, but I did enjoy it. TJ Newman is a retired, you probably all know this, but I'll just say it, a retired airline flight attendant. And so she does a great job of exploring and describing the duties and responsibilities of the people, in this case, that are flight attendants and pilots on this flight. This one starts out with a bang and ends with a bang, which I would say TJ Newman does very, very well. It begins with a flight that's about to take off, and the family is saying goodbye to their dad, who is the pilot. He gets on the plane and he discovers that his family have been kidnapped and he's being asked to do something on this flight that no pilot should ever do. So it's a story of how he navigates this threat, and it evolves over time, but it's very fast paced and it was really, really good. So I gave it 4 stars, which is what I also gave to Drowning. So they were both equally good for me. There were a few things I thought were a little far-fetched, but how do I know? I mean, I'm not a flight attendant, so but obviously, the whole premise was a little far-fetched when you think about it, because it's fiction. So hopefully, this would never happen in real life. The Mystery Guest by Nita Prose was my Book of the Month Club selection for January, and I'm happy to say that I did complete it. I've heard a lot of people say they didn't like this as much as they liked The Maid. Not everyone liked The Maid either, so there was big controversy, kind of a sort of a divide around readers who liked it or didn't like it. I liked this equally as much. I gave it 5 stars. This one makes me wonder what the next book will unfold for us because it ends in a space that allows you to consider what's next for Molly. That's all I'm going to say. This is just kind of like The Maid in the sense of its pacing. It starts out pretty fast paced. It also creates a lot of awareness of what happened to Molly as she was growing up, which is relevant to this story. I also will say that she's very good at it's lighthearted and sometimes it's funny. It's continues to, which makes me feel like it's more of a cozy than a regular, thriller, so to speak. It's definitely a mystery. There's a murder that has to be solved. And in this case, it's a guest at the hotel who's come to talk about his book. And then he is suddenly, he just falls and he's dead. And he had some tea or something. So they're pretty sure that he was poisoned. The question then is who poisoned him? I will say that there's always this kind of moment where Molly discloses something, at least in these 2 books so far. Molly discloses something in her childhood that's really painful and hard to read. So there is a moment where you're just like, oh, and then she just goes back to the rest of the story. So that seems to kind of be her theme, her way of writing. And I don't dislike it. I think, though, that people should be prepared because sometimes there are some dark moments in this book. And I mean, it might be a trigger warning for some people. So just tread lightly if you have a response to sexual assault. I'll just say that there is a bit of a trigger for sexual assault. But I really did like this, and I hope she continues to write with Molly's character at the forefront, and we'll see what happens with Molly next. And this one I could count toward Mardi Gras Readathon because it was a book about an event, which started off at the beginning and about a group of people. Then I read The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum, which was the Mardi Gras Readathon prompt choice for me for a book about music. This was my first novel by Brendan Slocum as well. I would categorize this one as a thriller. This book is about a classical musician who was given a violin as a younger person, and it was given to him by his grandmother, found in the attic. It was her grandfather's. It had been given to him, and she believed that the grandfather would want him to have it. He has a rather interesting family. His mother is very cruel to him and has very little relationship with him. Growing up, he didn't have a lot of means, but he worked really, really hard to give money to his mother, which and he worked really, really hard to learn the violin, and he was somewhat of a natural at playing the violin. So as his life propels him into this competitive space as a musician, then things shift for him, both financially. He continues to support his mother, but he has a little bit more money in his pocket, and he is kind of getting some notice, and people are starting to go watch his concerts. Simultaneously, though, there is a lot of content here which I did appreciate and had no idea about, being a white woman who does not swim in the circles with musicians, concert musicians, classical musicians. There's a lot of prejudice and racism and just terrible treatment that he describes in this book, which is true because he, in the end, really talks about how none of this is fiction, really. This is a very, very difficult place for people of color to perform, and especially people who are Black. The violin that is discovered when he takes it in to be repaired is discovered that it's a Stradivarius, which is one of the most valuable, probably the most valuable violin in the world. There are very few of them made by Stradivarius, very pricey, very valued. He discovers this, and this violin looked terrible, mind you. It was all beat up, it had rosin all over it. It was just like in a terrible place. So they repair it, and he begins to play this violin and travels all around the world. And the world sort of finds out that this is a Stradivarius given to this young, poor Black man by his grandmother. So some things start to happen. People start to want to claim this Stradivarius, white people whose family they believe gave his grandfather the violin. And then the violin is stolen. And so the whole book is about how he can get this violin back. Where is it? Who took it? All of those things came into play. So I gave this a 3-star rating. And here's why. The writing was good. It also, though, was at times kind of rushed, and I felt like we were just kind of being led along this thing without maybe getting to know the characters a little bit more, especially him. I mean, we got to know him, but it was really more about everything that was related to his performances. And it felt like it was rushed again, as I said. Maybe it was the way it was paced, and maybe it was so long and it was so many examples of, this and that and this and that. So it felt kind of repetitive. I'm not saying the racism pieces of it were repetitive because they were important. But some of the other stuff just felt like, he woke up, he had lunch, he, worked out, he played and practiced, and then he performed. And he woke up and you know what I mean? It just felt like you just kept going from place to place and doing the same thing. But I did enjoy it. I will read another Brendan Slocum. I heard a podcast about a book fair the other day where he was talking about his book. And I know he wrote Symphony of Secrets, which I still have from my library because I renewed it, but I haven't gotten to it yet. And I do want to follow this author along the way and just kind of see how he grows and develops as an author because I think there's a lot of potential there. And again, this one was good. 3 stars is a good rating. It just didn't kind of rise to the level of a 4 or certainly not a 5 for me. I read Midnight at the Blackbird Cafe by Heather Weber as another prompt for the Mardi Gras Readathon, and this one was a prompt to read about food. And so in this case, this is definitely about food. This one is the one that has a little bit of magical realism to it. I wasn't necessarily expecting that, but it didn't bother me. In fact, it was quite charming in some ways. This novel is set in Alabama too, so it would also fulfill the prompt of a novel being set on the Gulf Coast. And the main character's name is Anna Kate, whose grandma Z or Granny Z has died, and she comes to this community for the funeral. Anna Kate's family is from this area, and her mother and father were involved in a car accident when her mother was pregnant with her, and her father was killed, and her mother survived. There was so much angst about this with the family who lives in this small town in Alabama of the father that the mother and her child, Anna Kate, fled Alabama and never went back, and really just they stayed connected to Granny Z, but they really just did not ever return to that area. There were obviously bad memories for her mom, and also this hatred from this family of her dad's. She returns for the funeral and then takes on the cafe for a little while until she can sell it. And of course, the community doesn't want her to sell it. And the main sort of focus that relates to the title is that this cafe, Granny Z, was famous for creating this blackbird pie, which I think had blackberries in it. It did not contain real birds. And there are a lot of blackbirds at this particular time, and there are some photographers there that are, birding and really being with these birds in this, peak season of the blackbirds. And there are people that love this pie and feel like it has a magical quality to it. And so they're always coming in for this pie. And of course, people don't want her to sell the cafe. They want her to keep the cafe in business. So this is a familiar trope, right, of books that are set, in these little small towns and things. This is not an unfamiliar scenario. I would say that one of the challenges, and I gave this a 3 star, I would say that one of the challenges for me was that it wasn't necessarily unique. It is a trope that I'm familiar with, that a lot of us are familiar with if we read these kinds of books, and we have sort of an expectation of how it's going to end, and it did indeed end that way. I guess the characters were pretty well developed. There were just some, like, I mean, it was all kind of predictable, I guess, for me, but I did really enjoy it. And again, 3 stars is a good read. Heather Weber has written a number of books. She has a series called the Lucy Valentine series, and she's, again, kind of really just been pretty prolific. They all kind of have the same vibe in the title. One of them is South of the Buttonwood Tree. The Lights of Strawberry Cove, those are standalones. In the Middle of Hickory Lane, At the Coffee Shop of Curiosities. And then there's the Lucy Valentine series. So I would say that she's, got a lot of content out there. If you like this trope and if you like this setting, they're probably all set in the South as well. I think it's possible that you would enjoy it. So that is my wrap up for January of the books that I read. I enjoyed them all. I enjoyed my reading month. I felt like I was coming out of my slump. Now I'm kind of feeling like it's not a slump, it's like a I can't settle on something experience. But I am finishing what I started, and hopefully, and I'm, just kind of all over the place. Hence the pile of possibilities that you saw, which was really big, and the nonfiction books that I'm wanting to read, which is also really big. And every day that goes by, I walk past a book or I look in a shelf and I think, okay, readers, thanks for joining me. Let me know what you're reading, what you read in January, if you've read any of these. If you read for the Mardi Gras reading prompts, let me know that too. I saw a couple of you had some books that I had marked to read on your bookshelf as well. And so I hope that you're either reading these or enjoying other books that move you and that excite you. And as always, happy reading. Bye.